G'day, watch this.
Michael, the Prime Minister says that the purpose of establishing the fund was as an electoral slush fund.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to correspond with what actually appeared in the document.
No, it doesn't. Look, there's a range of questions that have to be asked of various people here right now. The most implausible proposition is the proposition we're being asked to live with, and that is that Bruce Wilson and Ralph Blewitt are the intended recipients of about $540,000, because they're the ones who got it. And if that's the way it should be, that they got the 540 large, they could take off and keep it, then I'll have a bit of that, please. I mean, honest to God, does anyone think that that is right and proper? So here's the range of questions that I think are the relevant ones right now. It's a bit disappointing of the Prime Minister that in all the time she had available to her, with the rapt attention of a fawning media, not once did the Prime Minister bring up the issue of the missing money and who got it. And if I was her, I'd be worried sick. I'd go, hang on a sec, did I create this slush fund, knowing, she called it a slush fund, did I create this thing, and then those bastards took off with the money? I'd be all over it like a rash. I would be as open as I could with the kimono. I'd have it open to the world. I'd say, right, here's what I did, here's when I did it, here's why I did it. I had no idea this bloke was ripping me off. I had no idea he was going to rip the members of the union off. There's a range of questions that a range of organisations need to answer. Number one, to the Australian Workers Union. Why are you not up in arms on behalf of the good and decent people who pay dues? Why aren't you out there bringing the people who took off with the money to justice? Tell us your story. Did you mean for them to keep that dough? Is it an unintended bonus or stranger things have happened than for a union to wish its officials to be enriched to that tune. But if that's the case, tell us. Number two, to Tees. Did your shareholders mean for that money to come from the state government in Western Australia, to go to Bruce and Ralph and for them to keep it? Did they? I mean, at present, I've seen your invoices, Tees. I've seen the way you filled out your internal paperwork. You said pay the AWU this money, the Australian Workers Union this money. But when push came to shove, your bosses wouldn't make a statement of complaint in respect of the financial deficiencies. So that's you, Tees. Number three, to the Prime Minister. Ma'am, you're all over this. Your handwriting is on the instrument that led to the Corporate Affairs Commissioner in Western Australia incorporating the entity that you now tell us was used to deceive you, ma'am. So why are you not now more open in taking this line of opening up about where the money actually went, how it is that you were ripped off? Why would you just say so churlishly, with great respect to you, that you've got an hour, go your hardest, clear me? It's like you're only worried about you, Julia Gillard, in your position. What about the poor buggers who've been ripped off in the union, who've got to put their money in? Why aren't you helping them out? Where is your genuine sympathy? I mean, it looks to me at present that you are trying to cover up for yourself, and I believe that you're trying to cover up for a much greater malaise, a much greater problem in the broader Labor and union movement. I've seen the note, the letter from Bob Smith. It was read in the Hansard in Victoria. I've seen it, the letter from Bob Smith, where he says Cambridge has got to be shut down. And this one, Ian Cambridge was calling for a Royal Commission. He's got to be shut down. If he's not, we're all history. I infer from that there's a lot of people scared in the Labor movement about the full discovery of the detail, the facts behind what we see, the tip of this little iceberg here that we see with the AWU. So I would support Ian Cambridge's call for a Royal Commission. And Ms Gillard, in large part I do it because of your obfuscation. You said to us, it's all on the public record, it's all out there. I didn't know what the association was for. Well, we now find out that's untrue. You called it a slush fund when you set it up. And you concealed what you're doing from your partners by not opening a file. I mean, we can all read, we've all read the transcript of your interview. So there's a lot of people who need to come clean. Julia Gillard's one of them, but there's heaps of others. And never forget what's at the heart of it. Working people putting their money in for representation in industrial, in unions, in labour unions, and then they turn around and see the big blokes take off with the dough, and that's just rank. It Fettingham stinks.
So if it were to be established as an electoral slush fund, as she says,
Yeah.
why doesn't that appear in the application?
Oh, I know, mate. No, of course. You see, you haven't got the bloody... Remember when you were a kid and you get the invisible ink and you put a little chemical and you can see it? You haven't got the magic glasses. She had subliminal messages in it, and she's conveyed the message to the Commissioner that, look, I'm being flippant, right, and smarty pants about it. I mean, the Office of Prime Minister shouldn't invite that sort of flippancy. But this particular lady does it because of the bullshit she speaks. It's crap. It's just patent crap. Anybody with half a brain, surely to God, can see it.
Wouldn't a solicitor have normally, given the fact that she was acting for the AWU as well, have called for at least a resolution or some documentation? Of course you would, David, of course you would. It's self-evident.
You can't, like, if I used to be a boss in Telstra, I can't go to a lawyer and say, can I have the Telstra Accounts Receivable Association, please? Of course, this is dodgy. It screams dodginess. It's got it written all over it.
Has the Prime Minister told us when she became aware that this entity was for a fraudulent purpose?
Yeah, well, fraudulent, she's never used that word. Was it misleading? Did it tell fibs about itself? Yeah. And the Prime Minister's departure interview, it's clear that she knew at the time it was an electoral slush fund, but that's not what she called the Corporate Affairs Commissioner.
At some stage, she would have realised that they were using the money in the fund for themselves.
Professor, at some point that was brought to all of our attention. The Prime Minister manifestly knows that now. At what point did she know that was the intention? Well, I would like to see that matter explored under oath. That would be a useful thing for us all. Put it to bed once and for all. Likewise in the Parliament. All you've got to do, ma'am, is stand up in the Parliament. We know you've got to tell the truth there. If you mislead the Parliament, that's pretty serious. Saying it to a compliant and unprepared group of Canberra Gallery people is hardly completely exculpatory. I wouldn't have thought that was particularly useful at all, other than as a sort of Academy Award performance.
When Slater and Gordon received the cheque for the balance of purchase money, when they had asked for a bank cheque, when they received a cheque from the sham, that must have been the time at which they must have realised that the sham was being misused.
Somebody, how could it not raise, you just put yourself in the position of the bookkeeper or the accountant, right, in a firm of lawyers with particular responsibility associated with trust fund management. If I was the accountant and I say, right, here's this Blewitt file, he's going to buy this house, keep in mind Wilson was concealing what the association was being used for from Miss Gillard. That's why he went to her firm to get to use its money to buy a house for him and his mate. But you're the bookkeeper or the accountant, and you come into work and you know you've got to have a bank cheque to make sure that it doesn't bounce, so that there's no deficiency in the trust fund account. What would you do if you got a cheque from this funny-looking association? It's not a bank cheque for a start. It's got Ralph's funny writing on it. You'd be frightened it would bounce, wouldn't you? So you go and see the partners and say, is this acceptable? I would have thought that would happen, but I don't know, Professor. I don't know. You can only draw inferences. The inference that I would draw from the presentation of that cheque drawn on the account, AWU Workplace Reform Association, says on the bottom of the cheque, the inference I would draw from that is that the firm was untroubled by the presentation of that association cheque, and that the firm had amongst its partners people who gave comfort to the financial people in the firm and said, no, this will be all right, let it go through.
Why does the Prime Minister refuse to make a statement on this in Parliament?
Ask the Prime Minister, Professor. It ought to be well known that if you mislead the media, you get elected. If you mislead the Parliament, you get the arse.
One of the problems with that so-called press conference, which was a press conference by ambush because nobody was advised in advance what the subject would be, one of the problems is that the most informed journalists were not there, in particular yourself, who was probably the most informed journalist in the country, Alan Jones, Hedley Thomas and Andrew Bolt.
Oh, look, I look at it like this. Fancy Chris Gase Remember the chase for Skase? And he took off to Mallorca and everyone wanted him and the Rozzers wanted him. And imagine Chris Skase walks into the police station one arvo and says to the young Connie on the desk, sorry, the young constable on the desk, "Constable, go your hardest. I know New South Wales Police have a range of questions they wish to pose to me. I'm here. Do not open the doors. Don't let anyone else in, none of your specialist colleagues, and don't let the absence of your files hinder you in your investigation, Constable. You have 1 hour. Question me. Go your hardest. And at the expiration of that hour, I will declare the case closed. New South Wales Police, having been furnished with the opportunity to make all the inquiries they wished of me." Well, there you are, Constable. Have you any further questions? Don't let your absence of understanding about detailed financial matters or the absence of the files on your desk hinder you in your investigations, Constable. You know what I mean? That's what the Prime Minister did. These poor buggers in Canberra be going, "Well, shit, I haven't got I don't know what happened. I only read the newspaper and I didn't read much of it because it was in the other mob's paper." And you see that in the questions. But you can also see it in the earnestness, and I thought too, the lividity or the redness rising. It was like Prince Planet and his pee. Remember that red used to come up? I saw it in the Prime Minister's face. She knows what happened. She took her best shot, which was to give an unprepared press gallery limited time, and they bought it, the silly buggers. Fair dinkum, they want horsewhipping those people. Take them out the back and flog them. Go and do your job properly.
Should the Prime Minister be asked to explain when she resigned from Slater and Gordon and when that took effect? When that
I think so, yeah, because the parliamentary biography is at odds with the statement of Andrew Gretsch, of the Managing Director of Slater and Gordon. That is unclear. Fancy if in America we said we had this big gap in bloody Kennedy's biography. No, the official biography is at odds with what the boss of the mob he used to work for says. Everyone all over that like a rash. But here, we're just sitting back saying, "Oh, well, there's a 6-month discrepancy, not to worry, it doesn't matter." She only went to work for the Leader of the Opposition, Labor Party in Victoria. There's a 6-month gap missing. I can't believe we're not more curious about that. What did you do for that time, man?
The Prime Minister has slammed some on the internet.
Quite rightly.
They have said.
Yeah, quite rightly.
To what extent is the Prime Minister's private life of relevance? When is it of public interest in
Well,
this
not
matter?
when you get that filthy stuff drawn in the cartoons. I'm sorry, the stuff, I don't even want to mention it by name, but that's just awful. No, I don't think the Prime Minister's private life, so far as her relationships and what happens inside the four walls of the house between her and Tim, or her and Bruce, or her and Craig, or her and whoever she's had in the past, that's not relevant.
It's not of public interest.
No, the fact of the relationship is that the Prime Minister was in a 4-year relationship with Bruce Wilson, but what they got up to in that, well, no, that's not of huge interest.
Should someone in the gallery have asked the Prime Minister what she said, whether she phoned Fairfax, or whether someone on her behalf phoned Fairfax to stop the broadcast of the interview which you had legaled, which had gone through the editorial process, and which was scheduled and promoted for broadcast on that day?
Well, whether the Prime Minister phoned directly or didn't phone directly, I don't know. I've heard people say the boss of Fairfax has said, that's Greg Highwood. He said, no, she did not. And the boss of the radio division said, no, she did not. Doesn't really matter, because she did phone News Limited, they folded and put that apology up, and the net effect of that within the Fairfax company was they went to water too, and they folded. And not that I in any way disparage Fairfax.
Is she under an obligation, is the Prime Minister under an obligation to set out in detail the terms of her conversation with John Hartigan of News Limited and his surprising decision?
I think that Hartigan is under some obligation to make that public, and he has. He's been interviewed by his own staff, and prior to leaving the News Limited organisation, he did make that quite public. More credit to him. The scary thing, though, is it's manifold, and the first of it is the absence of any inhibition in the Prime Minister that would inhibit her from phoning these sorts of people so as to advance her own interests, right? She didn't seem to feel any compunction about doing that. She just did it. And it's not a national interest. It's not a policy-related interest. It's an embarrassing matter in her own past that the Prime Minister exercised that influence over. The second point that concerns me is the ease with which the Prime Minister was able to recruit the Australian media so as to extinguish inquiry into what clearly is a legitimate matter. Why is it legitimate? $540,000, ping, gone, see ya. We know it was routed through that little bizzo that she set up, the slush fund, so it was used either, I don't know, the Prime Minister hasn't said, she hasn't rendered a judgment on this, it was either used properly for its intended purpose or it was used improperly to defraud or embezzle, and if it's the latter, then what's she done to help us get the money back to its rightful owners? What evidence has she given? So it's those twofold things, you know. If the Prime Minister feels that she had been defamed, well, the rest of us have got recourse to a lawyer and you go and issue a writ. Craig will show how. Craig Thompson did it. He thought he'd been defamed by the Sydney Morning Herald, so he sued him, and the process ran its course and evidence was called and discovered on either side. Do it in this case. You call the evidence, we'll get all the affidavit material and the appendices associated with the affidavits, the originals of which are still in the file, no order having been made for the return of them before Ronnie Madgwick, His Honour Ron Madgwick. So, you know, Prime Minister, if you've been defamed, let's get it out. Get it out there.
Since there were calls at the time for a Royal Commission, calls from within the Labour movement for a Royal Commission, but since then we've seen some other developments, as you've rightly pointed out, the Health Services Union, where there are reports of fraud going up to several $1 million, 20 million in one respect.
Isn't that disgusting?
But there are also the fact that it's become very obvious that there are very different standards, statutory standards of integrity, financial integrity required in relation to union officials compared with members of Parliament. In addition, there's been a whole new breed of career trade union officials, many of whom are now in Parliament and who will no doubt wish to protect this. Is there not now an even greater need for a Royal Commission? Not an inquiry as there was with the BER, because the BER inquiry was
Brad Ogle
by Mr. Yes, and he was obviously close to the government, but in addition he had no powers to compel.
No, look, this is a well-trodden path, Professor. The Royal Commission is a well-trodden, well understood. Once it gets a lick of steam up, we find out heaps of stuff. Now, look, it may be an insight into the timidity of the opposition here. I don't know why. I don't know why, in God's name, they have not been all over this like a rash. They seem indolent or scared, maybe. I don't know. I do not know. But I'd say to the opposition, you know, you must have been sickened. You see that bloody performance down in Canberra, and you buggers could have. You should have been asking questions that would lead to the truth. I speak to so many people about this who are disgusted by the absence of action. And then, because there's no action, then they start thinking, well, why? Have they got something to hide? Or do they approve of this sort of behaviour? You've got to go with your morality, right? With your moral compass. The Jesuits would have been very clear in explaining that to anybody who had been in their care. Go with morality. Don't sit there trying to second guess, what'll be the political fallout of this? Oh, well, you know, Laurie's going to say this, Michelle will say that, we'll get canned in the papers. Stuff that, just go with your heart. What's the truth here? What do you believe is moral? What is the proper thing to do?
If this were the United States, this would have gone before a grand jury, because grand juries are not controllable by the politicians. They're not initiated by the politicians. Would you see the need for a similar institution?
Oh, it'd be useful, wouldn't it? Professor, I know it is a well-considered and well-thought-through bugbear of yours, the absence of grand juries, number one, and number two, recall elections. And I think the grand jury impanelment would be useful here. Then just get Joe Citizen, sit down, have a look at all this data, and what do you reckon? The Royal Commission, you know, we've had so many wonderful ones, Wood and sundry others, Costigan. We learn so much about it. laws flow from those commissions of inquiry that are useful laws, and this is self-evident. I mean, in the little, tips of icebergs that we can see, this AWU and then Craig Thompson and Michael Williamson and others, surely to goodness there's enough fertile ground there for us to grow something good, with a well-instructed Royal Commissioner. I don't know what the hell's happened to governments. Even Barry O'Farrell here, that bloke Bailey in Victoria, what's wrong with them? Barry, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you looking at this? How can you come into work every day, you see that bloody Williamson and Craig Thompson? You could get it going, Barry. You could bloody have a Royal Commission now, in the same way as the police were gone through by Bob Carr. Well, hello, it's stinky, Barry. It stinks to high heaven, and you could do something. You don't have to wait for Canberra. Gee whiz, it just makes me wild.
And finally, could I remind you that I think it was last year that you submitted a list of questions.
Oh, to the Prime Minister.
To the Prime Minister. Have you received a response to that?
I have. And this is where the Prime Minister has a case to answer. Because she, through her staff, knowing at the time I had a radio show, right, and I'd tell everybody what she had to say, she said, I've answered this, it's all on the public record. Oh, is that true? Well, ma'am, if that is the case, what was on the public record at that time is at odds with what you told your partners in your departure interview. So what version are we to believe, ma'am? Was it a slush fund? Was it what you told the Corporate Affairs Commissioner in Western Australia? It was a training thing. Is it true that you didn't know anything about what was going on in it, as you said on the public record when you were first quizzed about it? And look, and my final little point I'll make about this. You and your partners in Slater and Gordon knew by at least the 11th of September 1995 in your departure interview, you all spoke about this thing, AWU Workplace Reform Association, and you spoke about the house and going to the auction and all that sort of stuff. So you knew about it on the 11th of September 1995. Poor old bloody Ian Cambridge, National Secretary of the Union, didn't find out about your little creation, the slush fund, until April the next year. You could have told him. In fact, you had a duty to tell him. You're lawyers, you've got a privileged position, and you didn't discharge that duty. You're shocking. You're just shocking, disgraceful.
Michael Smith, thank you very much for this interview, and thank you also for your enormous sacrifices in the search for
That's why I've got daggy shirts now. I can't afford.
Thank you.
So yeah.